I never thought it would come to this. For so long, I had worked so hard, poured my heart and soul into everything I did for my family, especially for Tyler. As a single mother, there were days I could barely keep my eyes open from exhaustion, but I did it. I did it for him. From the moment I found out I was pregnant, my entire world shifted. I promised myself I would do everything in my power to give him a life better than mine, better than the struggles I had growing up. And I did. I worked long hours, saved pennies, and made sure that he always had what he needed. I did it all without complaint, because I believed that was what mothers were supposed to do. When Tyler got engaged to Emily, I felt a swell of pride. I had watched him grow into a young man, and now he was about to start his own family. I was happy for him, genuinely happy. But a little part of me couldn't help but wonder if he would want me involved in his wedding plans. After all, I'd been through so much to give him the best start in life, and now he was about to embark on a new chapter of his own. I never imagined that things would unfold the way they did. It started off innocently enough. Tyler asked me to come over to their house one Sunday afternoon to discuss wedding details. I was thrilled, of course, excited to be part of such an important moment in his life. I thought maybe I could help with the planning, maybe some advice on decorations, or even helping Emily with some of the more intricate details. I could at least contribute in some small way, I thought. But as soon as I walked through the door, I felt it. The coolness, the unspoken distance between me and Emily's family. Her parents, both successful business people, were sitting at the kitchen table, discussing the wedding budget. And there I was, standing awkwardly in the corner, like an outsider in my own son's future. I smiled and tried to join in, offering a few suggestions, even joking about helping with some of the more mundane tasks, like picking up flowers or helping with the guest list. But that's when I first noticed it, the subtle but undeniable way they looked at me. My husband, who was more of a figurehead in the family than a real partner, gave me that half-hearted smile he always did when things got uncomfortable. Emily's mother, Evelyn, who had always been a little cold towards me, raised an eyebrow and asked, "Do you really think you can manage all this, Sarah? I mean, after all, it's going to be an expensive wedding." I laughed it off at first, thinking she was joking. But when I looked around, I realized no one else was laughing. The room was silent, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I tried to ignore the sting of her words, but they cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Evelyn, with her perfectly manicured nails and glossy hair, was always the one who made the final decisions in their family, and here she was, making me feel as though I didn't belong. And then there was my son, Tyler. He just sat there, looking uncomfortable, as if he couldn't decide whether to defend me or keep quiet. He knew his mother was struggling to make ends meet, but I didn't expect him to just sit there and let them treat me this way. "I don't think we really need any help, Mom," he said quietly. "I think Emily's mom and I have it covered." The words hit me harder than I expected. He hadn't even looked me in the eye when he said it. It was like he had already decided that I wasn't needed, that I was somehow too much of a burden. In that moment, everything changed. I realized that after all the sacrifices I made, all the years of taking care of him, my family had come to see me as nothing more than a financial resource. I was the person who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, but when it came time for recognition, there was nothing. I wasn't even part of the picture when it came to something as important as his wedding. I stood there, holding back tears, as Evelyn went on about catering and the floral arrangements, completely ignoring my presence. It was then that the full weight of my situation hit me. I had spent years building up my son's future, and now I was being cast aside. The realization was too much. I went home that evening, feeling empty. I had always thought that if I just worked hard enough, if I just gave enough of myself, my family would appreciate me. But instead, they were treating me like I was disposable. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at an old family photo. One of those pictures from when Tyler was just a little boy, holding my hand as we walked in the park. I remembered how much love I had given him, how much I had sacrificed. And now it felt like all of that was forgotten. I couldn't help but think about how different things were with Emily's family. They had money, power, and influence. They looked down on me like I was some kind of charity case. But I wasn't a charity case. I had my own strength, my own worth. I just hadn't seen it until now. That night, as I sat alone in my kitchen, I made a decision. No more. No more would I allow myself to be dismissed, to be made to feel like I didn't matter. I had spent far too long letting others define my worth. It was time to stand up for myself. I wasn't going to be the invisible woman anymore. If my family couldn't see my value, I would show them, and I would do it in a way they'd never forget. I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let them treat me like I was less than anymore. This was the moment I decided to take control of my life, and nothing, not even my own son, was going to stand in the way of that. I smiled to myself as I wiped away a tear. It wasn't sadness I felt, but determination. Something had shifted inside of me, and I was ready to face whatever came next. The next few weeks after the awkward family meeting passed in a blur. I tried to push everything out of my mind. After all, it was supposed to be a joyous time, a time to celebrate my son's new chapter with the woman he loved. But every time I looked at Tyler, I couldn't help but feel the distance between us growing. It was like he was drifting away from me, and I couldn't figure out why. We hadn't had any big fights or disagreements, but the way he looked at me now felt different. I was no longer the supportive mother who had always been there for him. Now I was just someone in the way. The wedding preparations were in full swing, and of course, I offered to help in any way I could. I wanted to be involved, to feel like I was still part of his life. I figured I could help with the little things, maybe assist with organizing the guest list or picking up items for the wedding. But when I brought it up, it was like I didn't even exist. "Mom, we really have it all covered," Tyler said, glancing at me but avoiding my eyes. He seemed almost uncomfortable in my presence. It wasn't like him at all. I could see the way he and Emily exchanged glances, silently communicating something I wasn't privy to. I tried to mask the hurt with a smile, brushing it off as nothing. After all, I wanted him to have the wedding of his dreams, even if it didn't include me. But things only got worse when we gathered together one weekend at Emily's parents' house for the wedding planning session. The whole atmosphere felt off. As we sat around the large dining table, with its gleaming surface reflecting the crystal chandeliers overhead, I felt like an outsider. Emily's parents, well-dressed and impeccably put together, were talking about the finer details of the wedding. Evelyn, her mother, was directing everything with her usual authoritative air. I could feel the tension building inside me. I hadn't even been asked to contribute to the conversation, let alone participate in the decision-making process. It was clear that Emily's parents had it all planned out. There was a lot of talk about the venue, catering, the photographer, and the expensive dresses. They had a budget, and everything was going to be just perfect. I was silent for a while, trying to find my place in all of this, but it became increasingly difficult. Every time I opened my mouth to offer a suggestion, I was either ignored or politely brushed aside. Evelyn finally turned to me, her smile so tight it looked painful. "Sarah, I'm sure you understand how these things work," she said, in a tone that was too sweet to be genuine. "But I think Emily and I will handle most of the arrangements. I'm sure you have a lot on your plate, being busy with, life." The way she said life made it sound like I was some kind of afterthought, a lower-tier participant in this grand event. The words stung more than I cared to admit. I didn't have the luxury of wealth like they did, but I had worked hard my entire life. What did she mean by life? It was as if she was implying that I was just a stay-at-home mom, without any ambition or accomplishments of my own. I wasn't just living life. I was working, I was striving, and I was providing. But no matter how much I wanted to speak up, no matter how much I wanted to tell them what I had sacrificed, I bit my tongue. I told myself that I should be grateful for the few moments I did get to share with Tyler. He was still my son, after all. But deep down, I knew I deserved more than just to be a spectator in my own son's life. At some point during the meeting, I was asked to go into the kitchen and make coffee for everyone. It was a small task, something insignificant, but it was a clear signal to me that I was being pushed aside. As I stood by the coffee maker, I could hear the conversation in the other room continuing without me. It was like I wasn't even part of the family anymore. I tried not to let my emotions get the best of me, but when I set the coffee cups on the table and caught the look on Evelyn's face, something inside me snapped. She looked at me with that same condescending smile, like I was nothing more than a servant to be relied upon for small tasks. It was then I realized just how deep this feeling of exclusion ran. I wasn't just being sidelined in wedding preparations. I was being treated like I was inferior, like I didn't matter. My contributions to the family, to my son, to this wedding, were nothing more than an afterthought. I could see it in their eyes, in the way they spoke to me with pity and disregard. I tried to keep my composure, but I couldn't stop the tears that welled up in my eyes. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about the wedding. It was about everything that had come before it. All those years of working myself to the bone, of being the one who held everything together, and now I was invisible. As I sat back down in the corner, quietly sipping my coffee, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to let them treat me this way anymore. I wasn't going to let my worth be measured by their standards or by their money. I had done enough, and now I was going to do something for me. No more would I let them look down on me. No more would I be the background player in their perfect little world. It was time for me to show them who I really was, and I was about to make sure that they would never forget it. I woke up the next morning with a fire inside me that I hadn't felt in years. The previous day's events, the way I was treated like I didn't matter, like I was invisible to my own family, had shaken me to the core. But instead of feeling defeated, something inside me snapped. I had spent my entire life supporting everyone else, putting everyone else's needs ahead of my own. And for what? To be dismissed, belittled, and excluded? No more. It was clear to me now that I had spent so much of my life being what everyone else wanted me to be. A dutiful wife, a supportive mother, a background player. But somewhere along the way, I had forgotten who I was, what I wanted. I wasn't just some poor, invisible woman. I was strong, capable, and had worked my ass off to provide for my family. They may have seen me as nothing more than a financial support system, but I knew my worth now. The idea formed in my mind so suddenly, so clearly, that I couldn't ignore it. I had saved up a decent amount over the years, quietly squirreling away money from side jobs and small investments. I'd always been careful with my finances, living frugally, putting aside every penny I could for my family. But now I realized that I had been neglecting my own dreams, my own desires. I didn't want to be the woman who was ignored any longer. I didn't want to be the poor relative who couldn't keep up with the Joneses. I was done being ashamed of where I came from, done being embarrassed by what I could afford. So I made a decision, a bold one. I was going to rent a limousine. No, not just one. A whole fleet of them. I wanted to show my in-laws and my son exactly what I was capable of. I wasn't going to shrink away and play the role of the invisible, too poor mother. I was going to stand tall and show up in a way that would make them sit up and take notice. I headed straight to a luxury car rental dealership that morning. I wasn't sure what to expect, but as soon as I walked in, I felt a sense of power, like I belonged there. The salesperson greeted me with a warm smile, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was being treated with respect. I walked confidently to the desk, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'd like to rent a few limousines," I said, surprising even myself with how sure I sounded. The salesperson raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by my request. "How many?" she asked, her tone polite but cautious. "3," I replied without hesitation. "And I want them all for the wedding this weekend." She blinked, clearly impressed, and quickly typed into her computer. "Of course, ma'am. We have several options available." I didn't know much about limousines or the extravagance of it all, but I didn't need to. This was no longer about practicality. It was about making a statement. I wasn't going to be relegated to the background of my own son's wedding. As we went over the details, color, interior, timing, I realized that I wasn't just renting luxury cars. I was renting confidence. I was renting the respect that I had long been denied. And in that moment, I felt a sense of liberation. I wasn't just renting a ride for the wedding. I was buying myself the freedom to reclaim my place in my family's life. By the time I walked out of the dealership, I was grinning. I knew my family would be shocked, and I knew it would make waves, but more than anything, I knew it was time to stop playing small. It was time for them to see me, truly see me, as someone who mattered. That afternoon, I stopped by a florist and picked up a bouquet of fresh flowers. It wasn't much, but it was for me. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about anyone else's needs. I was doing this for myself. The wedding, the family drama, everything. It was all secondary now. I was taking control. When I got home, I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror, really looked at myself. I saw a woman who had given everything to her family, but I also saw a woman who was finally ready to stand on her own. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. I had earned my place in this world, and I was about to make sure everyone knew it. That night, I made the final arrangements for the limousines. I felt a sense of excitement and anticipation bubble inside me. For the first time in a long time, I was doing something for me, something bold. And as I signed the rental agreement, I didn't just feel like I was making a business decision. I felt like I was taking back my life. The wedding was going to be a turning point, for me, for my family, for everyone who had underestimated me. I wasn't going to be ignored any longer. I wasn't going to let them dismiss me as too poor or too insignificant to matter. This was my moment, and I was going to make it count. The day of Tyler's wedding arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation, not just for the ceremony, but for what I had planned. I woke up that morning with a calmness I hadn't felt in ages. I had already made my mark, in my own quiet way, by securing the limousines. Now it was time to make an entrance that would leave no doubt in anyone's mind. I was not going to be overlooked anymore. The limousines arrived at my house around noon, just as I was getting dressed. I had chosen a sleek black dress that was simple yet elegant. No frills, no over-the-top extravagance. Just something that fit me well and made me feel confident. I had always kept things modest, never wanting to stand out too much. But today, I was going to let myself shine. As I stood by the window, I saw the black cars pull up to the curb. The sunlight reflected off the polished chrome, and the vehicles looked like something straight out of a movie. I felt a wave of adrenaline rush through me. My heart was pounding, not out of nervousness, but excitement. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I stepped out of the house, feeling a mixture of pride and a bit of nervousness. I couldn't help but think about what everyone would say when they saw me pull up. Would they be shocked? Would they realize just how wrong they had been about me all these years? I tried not to think too much about the in-laws or the guests who would be at the wedding. Instead, I focused on the reason I was doing this. I was doing it for me. As I climbed into the first limousine, I couldn't stop the smile that crept onto my face. The luxurious leather seats felt foreign, but exciting. I glanced out the window as we drove to the venue. The sky was clear and the sun shone brightly. Everything felt perfect. I had never done anything like this before, and I wasn't sure how it would play out, but I knew I had already won. When we arrived at the wedding venue, the first thing I noticed was the silence. It wasn't the typical hustle and bustle of a wedding. The guests were still milling about, but everything seemed to slow down as the limousines rolled up. I could see heads turning, whispers spreading among the crowd. People were stopping in their tracks, looking at the cars, and at me. I stepped out of the limousine with as much grace as I could muster. I wasn't walking in with my head down, ashamed. No, I was walking in as if I belonged there. Because I did. As soon as I hit the pavement, I felt all eyes on me. It wasn't the usual awkwardness or fear of judgment I was used to. It was a strange kind of power, the kind of power that comes from knowing you've just made your presence undeniable. There was a moment of absolute stillness. Guests were staring, some with their mouths agape, others whispering behind their hands. I could hear a few murmurs, but I kept my focus ahead. I wasn't going to let their judgment or confusion distract me. I had made my choice, and I was going to own it. My in-laws were standing near the entrance, their eyes widening as they saw the limousines. I couldn't help but notice Evelyn's face fall when she saw me. I hadn't seen her so speechless before, and for a brief moment it felt like sweet justice. They had tried so hard to exclude me, to make me feel like I didn't belong in their world. But here I was, walking into their carefully curated event, like I had been a part of it all along. The murmurs of the crowd continued as I walked toward the doors. Some of the guests looked at me with curiosity, while others seemed shocked by the display. I knew they were probably wondering how I could afford something so extravagant. What did they expect? A woman like me, too poor to even attend the wedding, showing up in style. It was almost too much for them to comprehend. But it didn't matter. The moment I crossed the threshold into the wedding venue, the entire room went quiet. I could feel the tension in the air, the confusion, and yes, a little bit of admiration from some corners. But more than anything, I could feel my heart racing with exhilaration. I had done it. I had made my mark. Evelyn and Tom, my husband's parents, were frozen in place. I caught Evelyn's eye and could see the disapproval radiating from her. But there was also something else. Something I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was a hint of regret, or maybe it was just plain embarrassment. Either way, it didn't matter. I walked past them without acknowledging the discomfort in their eyes. This wasn't about making them feel good. It wasn't even about proving anything to them anymore. It was about me. As I moved further into the venue, I overheard whispers. "Who is she?" someone asked. "She's the mother of the groom," another voice replied, almost in disbelief. A few people nodded, but it was clear that most were still processing what had just happened. I didn't need their approval. What mattered was that I had shown up. I had made it clear that I wasn't the poor relative they could look down on. I had made a statement, loud and clear. And now it was their turn to deal with it. As I made my way to my seat, I couldn't help but smile to myself. I had entered as the underdog, the one they thought didn't belong. And now I had their full attention. My entrance wasn't just for show. It was a reminder that I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't just Sarah, I was someone. And that was something I would carry with me forever. As I made my way deeper into the wedding venue, I could feel eyes following me. The room, which had been buzzing with chatter just moments before, had quieted down significantly. There was no mistaking it. I was the center of attention, and not in the way I had expected. People weren't whispering compliments or congratulating me for my grand entrance. Instead, they were shocked, confused, and most of all, uncomfortable. Evelyn, standing near the entrance with Tom, had frozen when I walked past. She was staring at me with a look of disbelief, trying to compose herself, but failing. She had always prided herself on keeping up appearances, and now I was standing here, in full view, having stolen the show. She was always the one who made sure everything was perfect for these events, and I had just completely upstaged her. I noticed Tom's face too. He was scowling, his usual air of superiority replaced with thinly veiled irritation. He didn't say anything to me directly, but his glare said it all. They both probably wanted to pretend this wasn't happening, that I wasn't there, but I wasn't going to let that happen. I took my seat at one of the back tables, far enough to avoid too much interaction, but close enough to be seen. As I sat down, I caught a few snickers and whispers from some of the other guests. They were all talking about me, speculating on how I could afford such a lavish display. There was one woman, I didn't know her name, but she was sitting nearby and kept glancing over at me with an expression that seemed like a mixture of curiosity and judgment. "She doesn't belong here," I overheard her say to her friend, clearly unaware I could hear. "I heard she's just a regular housekeeper. Who does she think she is showing up like that?" I smiled to myself. It wasn't the first time someone had doubted me, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. What I didn't expect was the way Evelyn was reacting. I watched her try to gather herself, glancing around as if she wanted to retreat into the background, as if pretending she didn't know me would make it all go away. Evelyn's voice suddenly rang out, trying to fill the awkward silence. "Well, I guess Sarah's come to make her entrance," she said, her tone dripping with forced politeness. But it wasn't convincing. It was as if she was trying to dismiss my presence with a single remark, trying to play it off as if it were some kind of joke. The guests around us didn't laugh. Instead, they exchanged uncertain looks, clearly not sure how to respond. I sat still, taking everything in. I wasn't angry, though. I knew what this moment was. It was the point where Evelyn and Tom realized they had underestimated me. It wasn't just about the money or the limousines. It was about the power they had tried to take away from me. I had let them treat me as if I were small, insignificant. But now they were realizing that I wasn't. As the evening went on, the whispers continued. More and more people started to talk about me, about my entrance, about how I could afford such extravagance. It wasn't long before I overheard one of Tom's close friends mention something about not understanding how someone like Sarah could suddenly come into money. I could see them trying to rationalize it in their heads, trying to make sense of it. They had been so quick to dismiss me, so eager to make sure I stayed in the background, out of sight, out of mind. But the truth was, they had no idea who I was or what I was capable of. They just saw a woman they assumed was too poor to matter. By now, Evelyn had become visibly uncomfortable. She kept looking around the room, trying to catch someone's eye, as if seeking validation for her own status. But no one was offering any. Instead, I saw a few people give her sympathetic looks, as if they were apologizing for her, knowing she had been put in a position where her superiority had been questioned. The situation had become even more apparent when some of the guests started to give me nods of acknowledgement. They weren't necessarily compliments, but I could tell they had shifted their perception. The people who had once turned up their noses at me were now cautiously considering that I might be someone to take seriously. They hadn't expected me to show up like this. And they certainly hadn't expected me to hold my ground so well. By the time dinner was served, the awkwardness was palpable. Evelyn kept trying to cover her tracks, her forced small talk not landing as usual. She even tried to make a few digs at me, remarking on how nice my dress was, or how I'd certainly impressed everyone with my limo. But her comments were hollow. They didn't carry the weight they used to. At one point, I caught her glaring at me across the room. Her lips were pressed together tightly, her cheeks flushed in frustration. I couldn't help but smile inwardly. I had walked in expecting judgment and condemnation, but what I found instead was the bitter taste of their own humiliation. They were scrambling to keep control of their perfectly curated world, but I had shaken it to its core. I didn't need to say a word. Everything that needed to be said had been said by my mere presence. The limousines, my outfit, my unshakable confidence. They all spoke louder than anything I could have ever said. I had made my point. The evening continued, but Evelyn's discomfort was evident. She was no longer the queen of the event. The spotlight had shifted, and no matter how hard she tried to ignore me or belittle my success, the damage had been done. The guests were beginning to see her for what she was, a woman who'd spent her life pretending to be above it all, only to find that someone like me could disrupt everything. By the end of the night, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. The humiliation that my in-laws had tried to force on me had backfired. I was no longer the invisible one. I had stepped into their world, and it was they who felt small. The power dynamics had shifted. and it felt good to finally know that I was the one in control. After the wedding, I decided I wasn't going to let all the attention fade away without taking action. It wasn't just about proving my worth to my in-laws anymore. It was about something bigger, about taking control of my future. I had spent years being the quiet, unnoticed woman in the background, just trying to make ends meet. But no more. That night at the wedding had awakened something inside of me. I wasn't going to let my life be defined by what anyone thought of me anymore. I had always been good with money. When I was younger, I had learned the hard way about budgeting and saving, and I had always been careful with my finances. Over the years, I had quietly accumulated some savings. Nothing extraordinary, but enough to give me the breathing room I needed to consider other opportunities. But for the longest time, I hadn't taken the leap. I had been too scared, too self-conscious of what others would think. But everything had changed now. My grand entrance at the wedding wasn't just a statement to my in-laws. It was a declaration to myself. I was ready to live life on my own terms, to stop letting other people's judgments dictate my worth. I had spent the past few weeks researching real estate markets, studying properties, and attending seminars. I wasn't just going to sit back and wait for something to fall into my lap. I was going to take control of my destiny. That's when I decided to make my first move. I went to a real estate office in the heart of the city, walking in with the kind of confidence I had never known before. The building was sleek and modern, the kind of place where you'd expect high-powered deals to go down. The receptionist looked up as I entered, her eyes scanning me briefly, no doubt sizing me up. I didn't look like the type who would walk through those doors, but I didn't care. I was here to make a statement. I told her I wanted to speak with a broker, and within minutes, I was sitting in an office with a woman named Lisa. Lisa was professional and polite, though there was a subtle skepticism in her tone when she asked what I was looking for. "Are you interested in buying, or are you just browsing?" she asked, glancing at me over her glasses. "I'm looking to buy," I said confidently, pushing a small folder with my financial details toward her. "I'm ready to make a deal." Lisa raised an eyebrow as she took the folder and flipped through it. It was clear she was surprised by what she saw. The documents I had put together included proof of my savings, my investment portfolio, and the down payment I had saved up over the years. I had been cautious, methodical in how I built my wealth, and now I was ready to put it to use. "You've got quite a bit saved up," Lisa said, leaning back in her chair, clearly taken aback. I could tell she wasn't expecting me to have anything substantial. She'd probably seen dozens of clients come through who couldn't back up their claims, people who talked big but had nothing to show for it. "I've been working hard, and I've made some smart decisions along the way," I said, my voice steady. I wasn't going to let her doubt me. "I'm ready to invest in something more significant now." For the next hour, Lisa and I went over various properties in the area. She showed me luxury homes, apartment complexes, and even a few commercial properties. I asked questions, took notes, and made sure to let her know I was serious. I wasn't some amateur pretending to know what I was doing. I had done my research, and I was in this for the long haul. By the time we finished our meeting, I had already narrowed down a few options. I was ready to make my first offer. An upscale apartment in a sought-after neighborhood. I knew the potential it had, both as a place to live and as an investment. I had been saving for years, and now it was time to take that leap. When I left the office that day, I felt a rush of excitement. I had just made the first real step toward building something for myself. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the independence that came with it. I wasn't just a stay-at-home mom anymore. I was a woman making strategic moves in the world of real estate, with plans to grow my portfolio and secure my financial future. A few weeks later, I received a call from Lisa. The offer I made on the apartment was accepted. I had officially made my first major purchase. I was beyond thrilled. This wasn't just a victory for me, it was a statement to everyone, including my in-laws, that I was no longer the same person they had dismissed all those years. I was building a future on my own terms, and nothing could take that away from me. I wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. The real estate deal had opened a door for me, and I was determined to walk through it, making even bigger and bolder moves. I wasn't going to stop until I had built something significant for myself. The money, the success, and the respect. They were all mine for the taking, and no one, not even Evelyn and Tom, could take that away from me. The wedding reception was supposed to be a joyous occasion, but the tension in the air was palpable. It had started as soon as I walked into the venue. My arrival in the limousine convoy, drawing the eyes of every guest. I could feel Evelyn's gaze on me the moment I stepped inside. Her face flushed with embarrassment. It wasn't just the looks that bothered her. It was the realization that everything she'd tried to control, all the ways she'd tried to belittle me, had backfired. I hadn't even taken a step into the reception hall before Evelyn cornered me. She was dressed in a stunning gown, her usual air of superiority radiating from her, but there was something different in the way she looked at me now. It wasn't the same dismissive look from before. This time, it was mixed with anger and frustration. She wasn't used to being the one put on the defensive. You really think this kind of entrance is going to impress anyone? Evelyn's voice was tight, barely masking her irritation. Her attempt to sound composed only made it clear how much she was trying to hide her discomfort. You don't belong here, Sarah. You never did. I stood my ground. I wasn't going to let her get under my skin anymore. The woman who had constantly looked down on me, who had questioned my place in her world, now felt threatened by me. And honestly, it felt good. It felt like justice. I didn't do it to impress anyone, Evelyn, I replied, my voice steady, even though I could feel the heat rising inside me. I did it for myself. This is my moment, and I'm not going to apologize for taking it. She scoffed, clearly not expecting my response, but the way she was looking at me told me she was trying to regain control of the situation. She didn't want the truth about me to come out, the truth that I wasn't some pitiful, broke woman she could manipulate anymore. Don't kid yourself, she shot back, her tone venomous. You think you're better than all of us now, don't you? You think because you have a little money, that somehow makes you worthy of being here? It's not about the money, Sarah. It's about class, dignity, and knowing your place. Her words hit me like a slap, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I smiled, knowing that she was still clinging to the old narrative, the one where I was the woman who didn't belong, the one who had to be kept in line. I was done with that story. I've got a lot more than money, Evelyn, I said, my voice low but firm. I've got the confidence to stand up for myself, and I've got the strength to do things for me, not for anyone else. You don't get to define who I am anymore. Not now. Not ever. Evelyn's face went white. The words I'd said must have hit her harder than I realized because she visibly faltered. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. The awkward silence stretched between us as she struggled to regain her composure. You're making a fool of yourself, Sarah, she finally managed. But there was no conviction in her voice anymore. She was starting to realize that her words no longer held the power they once did over me. Just then, Tyler walked into the room. He spotted us standing there and immediately came over. I could tell he had been listening to the exchange, but he was too cautious to say anything. His mother, Evelyn, looked at him for support, but Tyler's expression was unreadable. I could see the conflict in his eyes, but it didn't matter. For the first time, I didn't need his validation. As he approached, Evelyn turned to him, trying to act like nothing had happened. Tyler, dear, don't listen to her. She's just trying to cause trouble. This isn't the place for her, not with her background. I saw Tyler's gaze flicker between me and his mother. I could almost feel the weight of his disappointment in his eyes. This was the moment he had been avoiding. The moment when he had to choose between his loyalty to his mother and his respect for me. But instead of siding with his mother, Tyler turned to me. His voice was quiet but steady when he spoke. Mom, I don't agree with everything that's been said tonight, but I do know one thing. Sarah has worked hard for everything she has. You may not understand it, but that's something I respect. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. Evelyn opened her mouth to argue, but Tyler held up his hand, stopping her. "Mom, I think you've said enough." I looked at Tyler and nodded, giving him a small smile. He wasn't perfect, and he still had a lot to learn. But this moment, this quiet support, meant more to me than he could know. Evelyn stood there, silent, and I could feel the shift in the room. For the first time, she wasn't the one holding the reins. I had taken back my power, not just from her, but from the entire situation. And as the reception continued around us, I realized that my presence here was no longer just about proving something to her. It was about proving something to myself. The evening wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And the truth, no matter how much Evelyn hated it, was clear. I wasn't going anywhere. I was here to stay. The days following the wedding were a whirlwind of shock and change. Evelyn had never been one to back down from a confrontation, but after the scene I'd caused at the reception, it seemed she was left with nothing but bitterness. She could no longer look down on me with the same smug air of superiority. What I'd done wasn't just a slap in the face. It had shaken her entire world. As the weeks passed, Evelyn's behavior became more erratic. The family's once spotless reputation seemed to be crumbling around her. Her attempts to undermine me only made her look more pathetic in front of everyone. At family gatherings, people began avoiding her, too aware of the way she had treated me. Even her closest friends started distancing themselves, whispers of her cruelty spreading faster than she could mend them. Meanwhile, my life was moving in a completely different direction. Word of my real estate success started to get out. It wasn't just the flashy entrance at the wedding that made people notice me. It was my business dealings, the properties I'd acquired, and the quiet but undeniable rise I was making in the real estate market. People who had once looked at me as nothing more than a side character in their own dramas were now seeing me as a force to be reckoned with. I had put years into learning about real estate, studying the market, taking risks, and even doing some of the hard work on my own before I ever got help from a professional. And now it was paying off. My first successful property purchase, followed by 2 more in quick succession, made me a name in the local market. I wasn't just some poor woman who happened to rent a limo one day. I was someone who was making real, calculated moves and securing my own future. My success wasn't lost on the community either. Local news outlets picked up the story, intrigued by the woman who had quietly built a real estate empire from the ground up. Articles were written about me, interviews conducted, and before I knew it, I was being asked to speak at local business events. People admired my courage, my ability to reinvent myself, and most importantly, my ability to stand up for what I deserved. At the same time, Evelyn's world began to unravel. The once prominent social circles she'd so carefully curated began to fray at the edges. Her friends no longer invited her to the parties, and when they did, the whispers followed her wherever she went. It wasn't just my presence at the wedding reception that had caused the stir. It was the way she'd handled it afterward. Her attempts to paint me as a failure, a woman who didn't belong in their high society, only served to make her look petty and vindictive. She couldn't accept that the world had changed, that the people she had so easily dismissed had risen above her grasp. One evening, a family gathering was planned at a local restaurant, and I had heard through the grapevine that Evelyn was planning to attend. I almost laughed at the thought. She had no idea how much she had already lost. But I decided I would go. After all, it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about me, about showing everyone what I had accomplished despite the odds. When I walked into the restaurant, I could feel the shift. The moment I entered, heads turned, and for the first time, it wasn't because I was the outsider. People were genuinely interested in my success, in the woman who had found her own path. I could hear the quiet conversations around me, snippets of praise here and there. It was a feeling I had never experienced before. It was like I had finally stepped into the life I had been working toward all these years. But Evelyn was a different story. She was sitting at the center of the table, surrounded by her usual crowd of wealthy friends. I noticed the way her back stiffened when she saw me. Her smile was forced, and for once I could see the cracks in her facade. The spotlight that used to be hers was now shining on me, and it was clear she didn't know how to handle it. She made a half-hearted attempt to greet me, her tone still dripping with the same condescension I had grown used to. But no one was paying attention to her anymore. They were looking at me, asking me questions about my real estate ventures, offering congratulations on my recent purchases. It was in that moment that I realized how much things had changed. Evelyn, the woman who had once controlled the narrative, had lost her grip. And I was no longer the woman she could easily dismiss. As the night wore on, Evelyn grew quieter and quieter. She kept trying to interject into conversations, but no one was listening to her. The more she tried to talk about her connections and class, the more obvious it became that no one cared. Her reputation, built on years of manipulation and social climbing, was crumbling in front of her eyes, and she knew it. Meanwhile, my reputation was rising, and it felt like a wave of validation I had never expected. For the first time, people weren't seeing me as just a wife or mother in the background of someone else's story. They were seeing me as a successful, independent woman, someone who had built something for herself. Evelyn left the restaurant early that night, her face a picture of defeat. It was a small, quiet victory for me, but it meant the world. Her downfall wasn't just about the wedding or the limo. It was about the realization that she had spent so many years trying to control others, only to lose everything in the end. For me, the night wasn't about rubbing my success in her face. It was about embracing what I had built for myself, knowing that I had taken the hard road, the one where I had to fight for everything. And I wasn't about to let anyone, not Evelyn, not anyone, take that away from me. Months after the wedding, I stood in front of my new home, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. My investments had paid off, and I was finally living life on my own terms. The house wasn't just a symbol of wealth. It was a symbol of freedom and self-respect. At a family gathering, I no longer needed to prove myself. My success spoke for itself. Evelyn and Tom were silent, and I realized then that I had won. My independence was the ultimate triumph. I had reclaimed my life.